I've been a cop for about 10 years now, and I've seen my fair share of weird stuff. But this still haunts me. It was a cold, quiet night shift, the kind where nothing much happens except the occasional drunk driver or a raccoon darting across the road. Around 2 a.m., I got a call about an abandoned car on Route 47, a stretch of highway that's practically in the middle of nowhere. When I arrived, the scene was unsettling. The car, a beat-up sedan, was parked on the shoulder, its headlights cutting through the fog like something out of a horror movie. Both front doors were wide open, but there was no one around. I called it in and walked over to take a look. The first thing I noticed was how clean the car was inside. No trash, no personal belongings, nothing. Except for a phone sitting on the passenger seat. The phone screen was lit, playing a video on a loop. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. The video showed a figure in a dark hoodie standing perfectly still, their face completely obscured. They weren't moving, not even breathing, as far as I could tell. Just staring, or at least it felt like they were, straight at the camera. My gut told me to leave it alone, but, you know, duty calls. I reached for the phone, but as soon as I picked it up, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, like someone was walking up real close. My heart shot into my throat. I spun around with my flashlight, ready to confront whoever, or whatever, it was. But there was no one there. Just the empty highway stretching into the dark. I told myself it was my imagination, but every hair on my body was standing up. I looked back at the car, and the video on the phone had changed. The hooded figure was closer now, filling the frame. It was like they had moved while I wasn't looking. I swear, the moment I realized that, I felt something brush past me, cold and quick. I don't scare easily, but I was done. I shut the phone off, slammed the car doors, and radioed for a tow. As I walked back to my patrol car, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, following me. The strangest part? When the tow truck driver showed up, the car was gone. Just gone. There weren't even tire tracks in the dirt where it had been. And the phone. It wasn't in my hand anymore. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. People tell me I was just tired, maybe imagining things. But I know what I saw. And every time I drive that stretch of Route 47, I can't help but feel like I'm being watched. The next day, I couldn't shake it. I told myself to let it go. Plenty of weird things happen on night shifts, right? But this was different. It stuck with me like a splinter under my skin. I decided to check the logs and see if there was any report of a missing person or stolen vehicle matching that car. Nothing came up. It was like the car had never existed. Frustrated, I reached out to the tow company, thinking maybe they'd picked it up and forgotten to log it. The driver, a guy named Dale who I'd worked with plenty of times, swore up and down that when he got to the scene, there was nothing there but tire marks leading off into the grass, and even those didn't go far. Now, here's where things get even weirder. That night, I was back on duty. Same shift, same route. I wasn't planning to go near Route 47, but halfway through my patrol, I got a notification on my personal phone. No number, no sender. Just a message. You left something behind. My blood ran cold. I didn't tell anyone about the phone in the car or what I'd seen in that video. I checked my phone over and over, but there was nothing in my message history. No trace of the notification at all. Against my better judgment, I drove back to the spot where I'd found the car. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, then leave. But when I pulled over, my headlights illuminated something on the side of the road. It was the same phone. I didn't want to touch it. Hell, I didn't even want to get out of the car. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed a pair of gloves from the glove box and stepped out, keeping my flashlight trained on the phone. It was playing the video again. This time, the hooded figure wasn't just closer, it was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it was moving. And it wasn't just the figure. The background in the video was no longer a blank, dark void. It was the highway. My highway. The same stretch of road where I was standing. I felt like my chest was caving in. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then, in the video, The figure started to raise a hand, pointing directly at the camera. No, not at the camera. At me. The sound of my own breathing was deafening. And then, from somewhere in the darkness behind me, I heard it again. Those footsteps. I don't remember running back to my car, but the next thing I knew, I was inside, locking the doors and flooring it down the highway. I didn't stop until I was back at the station, where I sat in my car for what felt like hours, shaking. I didn't file a report about that second night. How could I? No one would believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I believe it myself. But every now and then, I still get those messages. Random notifications with no sender, always saying the same thing. You left something behind. And sometimes, when I'm driving that stretch of Route 47, I swear I see a figure standing on the side of the road. Always in the corner of my eye, always gone when I... It was a little past midnight when I got the call. A quiet suburban street, just another routine patrol. The air was cool, the kind of chill that sneaks up on you, and the neighborhood was dead silent, except for the sound of my boots on the pavement. That's when I saw him. He was just standing there. A guy wearing this cheap, white rabbit mask, completely still, staring at a house on the corner like he was waiting for something. My gut immediately told me something was off. People don't just hang out in masks in the middle of the night, not in a place like this. I called out to him. Hey, what are you doing here? He didn't answer. Instead, he bolted, straight into the yard of the house he'd been watching. I ran after him, but by the time I rounded the corner, he was gone. I'm talking vanished. The only thing I heard was this loud crash from the front of the house. I whipped around and saw the door wide open, swinging on its hinges. I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. The place looked trashed, furniture overturned, pictures off the walls, like someone had torn through it in a rage. And there, in the middle of the living room floor, was the rabbit mask. Just lying there, like he wanted me to find it. I stood frozen, staring at the mask like it might jump up and bite me. The air inside the house felt wrong. Heavy, like the kind of pressure you feel before a storm. My radio crackled, snapping me back to reality. I called for backup, but something told me I shouldn't wait. Hello. I called out. My voice echoed back, but no one answered. I moved deeper into the house, stepping over a shattered coffee table. The place was chaos, but it didn't feel random. It felt deliberate, like someone or something wanted it this way. The homeowner, a guy named Steve, arrived a few minutes later. He was mid-40s, looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. When he saw the mess, his face went pale. What the hell? Who did this? He stammered. You didn't see anyone earlier? Hear anything strange? I asked. No. I was out at a friend's house all night. Nobody's supposed to be here. I showed him the mask. He flinched, like he recognized it but didn't want to say. That's not mine, he muttered. His voice dropped to a whisper. No one's been here. Right? I didn't have an answer. My gut told me otherwise. As we searched the house together, the unease only grew. Every room had been disturbed, but there was no sign of forced entry other than the front door. No muddy footprints, no broken windows, nothing. It was like the place had been ransacked from the inside out. And then we heard it. A faint, shuffling sound coming from upstairs. Steve and I locked eyes, and I could see the fear written all over his face. Stay here, I told him, though I wasn't exactly eager to check it out myself. I crept up the stairs, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The shuffling stopped as soon as I reached the top. There was a single hallway with 3 doors, all of them slightly ajar. I nudged the first one open. Empty. Just a guest room with the bed neatly made. The second room was a bathroom. Also empty. The last door led to the master bedroom. As soon as I stepped inside, the closet door creaked open on its own. Police. Come out now. I barked, raising my flashlight toward the shadows. But no one emerged. I swung the door open, and found nothing but clothes hanging neatly on their racks. Yet the air was freezing. It was supposed to be a routine call. A neighbor reported yelling and loud crashes from the house next door, but by the time I arrived, everything was silent. Too silent. You know that kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl? That's exactly what it felt like standing on the porch of that house. I knocked a few times, called out, "Police, anyone home?" Nothing. But the door was unlocked, so I stepped inside. The living room was a wreck, chairs overturned, a smashed lamp on the floor, and a coffee table in pieces. It looked like a tornado had ripped through, but what hit me hardest was the smell. Not something obvious, like trash or food gone bad. It was off. Faint, but enough to make my stomach turn. As I cleared the house, it became clear no one was there. The bedroom had a broken mirror. The bed was unmade, with sheets half ripped off. Then I made my way to the garage. That's when I saw it. A big old chest freezer shoved into the corner, duct taped shut like someone didn't want it to ever be opened. I remember standing there, staring at it, my gut twisting. I knew, even before I opened it, that something was wrong. I called it in, and with my captain's permission, I cut through the tape. The second the lid creaked open, the smell hit me like a freight train. There she was, a woman's body, wrapped up tight in sheets. Her face was covered, but you could see her hands poking out, stiff and gray. I swear, for a second, it felt like the room tilted. I radioed dispatch, my voice shaking just enough for them to ask if I was okay. "Send backup. We've got a body," I managed to get out. Then I stepped outside to get some air. The smell clung to me like it didn't want to let go, and the image of her hands, those pale, lifeless hands, was burned into my brain. A quick check on the homeowner's records told us he was her husband, Eric Thompson. Married 6 years. No priors. I half expected him to have vanished, to be halfway across the country by now, but he was sitting in a diner just a few blocks away, calmly eating pancakes like it was any other Sunday morning. When we walked in, he looked up, gave a little nod, and set his fork down. No fight, no resistance. "Guess you found her," he said, just like that, as if he were talking about a lost dog. The way he said it, flat and cold, sent a chill down my spine. I've dealt with a lot of bad people in my time, but the lack of anything in his voice, that empty, hollow tone, was worse than shouting or pleading. It was like he didn't even see her as a person. We cuffed him right there at the table. The other customers just stared, frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. Eric didn't say another word, just stood up and let us lead him out. I'll never forget the look on his face as we walked him to the squad car. It wasn't fear or regret. It was a faint smirk, like he was holding on to some secret. The smell hit me first, stale, sickly, and heavy, like the air itself had been trapped for days. I was there for a welfare check, just a routine call to check on an elderly woman. The neighbors hadn't seen her for a while, and they were worried. I knocked, but no answer. The door wasn't locked, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. The living room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight against the midday sun. She was sitting there, in an old recliner, staring at the wall. Thin, frail, and motionless, like a statue forgotten by time. "Ma'am." I called out, but she didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She just sat there. I remember thinking maybe she was catatonic, but her eyes, they weren't empty. They looked alive, like they had been watching something long after it was gone. I took a step further into the room, and that's when I saw him. He was slumped in the far corner, half hidden behind the sofa. A man, probably in his 40s. His skin had that unmistakable pallor of death, his hand loosely gripping a gun. My stomach turned as I realized he'd been there for days, maybe longer. "Ma'am, is that your son?" I asked, my voice shaking. No response. Not a word. She didn't even glance his way. She just kept staring, her hands folded neatly in her lap, like none of it was real to her. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the kind you can't shake, no matter how hard you try. I knelt down to check the man's pulse, even though I knew it was pointless. His body was stiff, cold, like a mannequin someone had forgotten to put away. The gun in his hand was small, a revolver, and from the look of the wound on his temple, it had done its job cleanly. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere deeper in the house. "Ma'am," I said again, trying to steady my voice. "What happened here?" She didn't even glance my way. She kept staring at that same spot on the wall, as if the answer was etched into the peeling wallpaper. Her lips were slightly parted, like she was just about to say something, but the words never came. The eerie stillness of it all was suffocating. No crying, no shock, just silence. And the way she sat there, so calm, so unaffected, it felt like she'd been sitting there forever, frozen in the moment he died. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. The questions swirling in my head were endless, but the silence in that room swallowed them all. I glanced back at the old woman, her blank expression suddenly giving me a different kind of unease. There was something too still about her, too composed. "Ma'am, did you see what happened?" I asked carefully, trying to sound calm, though my heart was pounding. Her eyes finally moved, slowly shifting to meet mine. They weren't scared or sad. They were calm, empty. "He wouldn't stop yelling," she said softly, her voice like a whisper carried on a dying breeze. I froze. Those words, that tone, it wasn't grief. It was something else entirely. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking just enough to betray my nerves. She tilted her head slightly, almost like she was confused by my question. "He was angry," she said, like she was explaining the weather. "He was always angry. But he got quiet after." My blood ran cold. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but the way her gaze flicked to the revolver and then back to me, it said everything. You shot him?" I stammered, the words catching in my throat. Her lips curled, just slightly, into something that could have been a smile or a grimace. "He was yelling," she repeated, her voice flat. "And then he wasn't." My hands were shaking as I reached for my radio, but something stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was the way she just sat there, so calm, so detached. Like she didn't even care about what she'd done, or maybe like she'd been waiting for someone to come find out. I didn't know whether to feel sorry for her or afraid of her. All I knew was that I needed to get out of that house before